Welcome back to the garage. On this week's episode, we're talking about those pesky oil leaks and when they can become a problem. It can be pretty difficult to diagnose. They really can. In some occasions they're really easy, but in most occasions you may not see any oil leaking on the grounds, but your dipstick, when you check it, it's always low. Unless you're burning oil, which could be from the tailpipe, you could have an oil leak, and that oil leak is accruing underneath the frame body parts of your vehicle. We're going to go back into the garage and check out what we're talking about, revealing some pretty pesky oil leaks. So this engine is smoking pretty bad. It just kind of came on as it started to warm up. Now if you come close and take a peek, there's exhaust manifolds right underneath this valve cover gasket, and that valve cover gasket is designed to seal up between the cover and that valve train. If that rubber gasket is leaking, it's going to go right onto that exhaust manifold, and that's not a good thing. Now that oil, sure enough, is leaking from that valve cover gasket. That's a bad situation. That's a rubber gasket. It can get hard and brittle. Rubber gaskets, over time, they'll age, get hard and brittle, and they won't be able to seal up. The other problem with this car as it came in, it was running rough. It had a check engine light. Let's dive in and see what we can find. So cool. So with this engine, we've got this misfire. We understood that this misfire is more than likely what's very common, emanating from inside this coil housing. As we pull this direct ignition coil out, we can see not a spark plug wire, but an ignition boot, and this thing is saturated with engine oil. And that explains two things. One, the misfire, because you're going to get oil all over that spark plug porcelain. That needs to be dry. That'll create a misfire. And the second thing, you won't see this oil leak on the ground as it's leaking internally into that spark plug well. For the most part, oil leaks cannot be that difficult. In some occasions, you'll see where that oil pan is leaking, or you'll see where perhaps an oil pressure switch is leaking. But in some occasions, when the whole undercarriage is just saturated with oil, like an Exxon oil Valdez spill, that can be difficult. How do we check it? Well, we utilize an ultraviolet dye that we pour into the engine crankcase so that we can check it with an ultraviolet light. Let's go underneath the vehicle and see how this is done. So the engine's been running with this dye circulating, and we can use this ultraviolet light to actually shine in on the area. Wherever we see that contrast of that fluorescent dye, that's where that culprit seal or silicone or any point of the engine is compromised. This green dye is very evident from right at this oil pan, this lower steel oil pan. There is a rubber gasket. In some occasions, these steel pans can have silicone. Well, that's where it's leaking. You can see the difference and see that green dye. That shows up clearly that this is a lower oil pan that's leaking. Another big problem is with oil leaks, you may have not had an oil leak, and all of a sudden you have an oil leak after your recent oil change. Well, here's a few tips. Number one, if you've got this oil filter in this box sitting up in a warehouse without any saran wrap cover or any way to seal up the vital rubber seal on that oil filter, well, that could cause some contaminants, some etching on the rubber seal itself, and cause an oil filter to leak. The other fact is, if you're in doing your own oil change and you tighten that filter up and you over tighten it like the jaws of life with this oil filter wrench, you will etch the side of this oil filter, and that eventually is going to leak oil. Last tip is key. Always remember, when you're doing the oil change, change out at least the drain plug gasket or O-ring. These guys are vital and they can leak. Sometimes you got to replace the whole drain plug. These drain plugs come on and off every time you do an oil change, and it's good measure to at least change the drain plug gasket or replace that drain plug. On this week's viewer email, we've got Samantha out of Chandler, Arizona. She watched our timing belt video and she had a problem. She took her car into another garage, and after 2 days or so of driving the car, after getting her timing belt done, she said it started running rough. Well, Samantha, more than likely, the timing belt originally wasn't timed properly. The timing belt, as it just states, timing has to be exactly right. So take it back to the other garage. They should get that corrected for you. It kind of can be a common problem if a mechanic doesn't get that exactly straight. If you don't want to dance with the other garage, come on down to Desert Car Care. We'll give you a second opinion. Otherwise, people, thanks for hanging with the garage. We always love having you guys. Remember to subscribe. If you got any comments or questions, Frank at desertcarcare.com. I'll see you guys next week inside the garage.